Welcome to the CEC Report. It's February 16th and I'm Robert Barwick, and once again I'm joined by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
All right, in today's CEC Report we have the first item is our new ally against Syria, Al-Qaeda. Second, after ditching 500 maintenance jobs, is flying Qantas Russian roulette. And finally, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's own expert rips the Water Act to shreds. So first, our new ally against Syria, Al-Qaeda. For more than a decade now, Australia has been on the front line in the war on terror. We've been fighting, we've been dying, and we've been giving up our civil liberties to fight Al-Qaeda, or so we were told. Now we have the situation where those who are pushing for regime change in Syria, which includes our Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd, as we discussed last week, and they're pushing it so they can provoke a bigger showdown with Russia and China, they are in league with the very same Al-Qaeda, our bitter enemy for the last decade. On the 10th of February, the McClatchy News Service published a report by Washington DC correspondent Jonathan Landay confirming from US intelligence officials that Al-Qaeda was responsible for a string of suicide bombings in Damascus and Aleppo that killed hundreds of civilians and wounded many more. The Landay report began, quote, "The Iraqi branch of Al-Qaeda seeking to exploit the bloody turmoil in Syria to reassert its potency carried out the two recent bombings in the Syrian capital, Damascus, and likely was behind suicide bombings on February 10th that killed at least 28 people in the largest city, Aleppo," US officials told McClatchy. The officials cited US intelligence reports on the incidents, which appear to verify Syrian President Bashar Assad's charges of an Al-Qaeda involvement in the 11-month uprising against his rule, end quote. Now, following these revelations coming out, which effectively amount to Al-Qaeda endorsing and enjoining the Western-led coalition against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, Lyndon LaRouche, the American statesman and physical economist, released a statement in which he denounced President Barack Obama's what he called homicidal hypocrisy in the strongest possible terms. This is a quote from LaRouche. "At every public opportunity, Obama touts himself as the president who killed Osama bin Laden," LaRouche said. "But now we have concrete evidence that Al-Qaeda members have been infiltrated into Syria from Iraq to carry out atrocities, targeting the civilian population as well as government officials. This is the height of homicidal hypocrisy, just what we have come to expect from our Nero-like narcissist president," end quote. Craig, if people understood what Al-Qaeda really is, this is no surprise, is it?
No, Robbie, I think also what is really surprising about this is the fact that the United States President will now be seen to be siding with the very terrorist operation that he has sworn that his entire presidency is going to combat. Now that tells you something about how desperate the likes of Obama is, and we know that Obama is basically a tool of the British Empire, of the British Crown. He was put into position through British finance money through the Cayman Islands. He was funded into the presidency, and he's done nothing but support the interests of the British Empire of monetarism ever since. So you have to look at what he's doing now, apart from the fact that he has this homicidal lunacy as part of his personality defect. But this is also in reflection of just how serious the disintegration of the entire British monetarist system is. And over this last week, you've seen this bailout of Greece, $170 billion that they're trying to scrape together in order to bail Greece out. And that's going to fall apart by the look of it anyway, because they've just called snap elections. So you say, well, what's going on here? Well, the fact is the British Empire, its financial system is disintegrating at such a rate that they fear the likes of Russia and China coming to the fore, because Russia and China are making at least some moves to protect their populations. President Putin's come out with policies that intend to protect his populations.
And consequently their economies are growing relatively, while the West is collapsing.
Yeah, and so consequently, if you go back and look at a lot of material that we have on our website and on the LaRouche website, lpac.com, you'll find that it's no surprise that the British asset, Al-Qaeda, which was created effectively with the US and NATO in the Afghanistan war against Russia back in the 70s, right? It was created by huge amounts of money. Now, it's also interesting that, back in 2007, we wrote extensively about a big scandal that broke in the United States and Britain about the fact that Prince Bandar bin Sultan was caught with $2 billion of bribes coming from what was called the Al-Yamama arms for oil deal between the Thatcher government and the Saudi Arabian government, whereby the Thatcher government was going to sell weapons to the Saudis and the Saudis would basically give one shipload of oil to Britain every single day.
And that created a slush fund which they then used, in Bandar's own words, to fund Al-Qaeda.
And 9/11. Now, we've gone through this in great detail. So when you look at this, you see here you have the President of the United States, who's actually a British asset, acting with Al-Qaeda. All you can say is that they are desperate. It's surprising, but not something you can say it's completely out of left field, because the intention is to create a world war, thermonuclear war, as a counterposition to the fact that you've got Russia, China and India developing. And remember, we said it many times on this program, that the intention of the British Empire is population reduction, bringing the world's population down from 7 billion down to about 1 billion. Well, global thermonuclear war is not just going to bring it down to 1 billion, but we could see this extinction of the human race. And this is the sorts of serious issues that these sorts of things are bringing up. And you've got Kevin Rudd, our foreign minister, wading into this.
Now, when we've been warning people, Craig, about this, and LaRouche has been warning for months and months now about this war danger, it's the kind of thing that's very terrifying, and people have a reflex, sort of instinctive reaction of trying to wish it weren't true, right, and therefore ignore it.
Oh, it's terrifying, Robbie.
It is. But when something like this comes out, it tells you, and it needs to tell the whole population, that everything they've been told by these authorities is a lie. If they're willing to get into bed with the same boogeyman they've been telling us for 10 years is the reason our soldiers are dying in Afghanistan, they're lying through their teeth.
Well, they don't care. They're reliant on a controlled media, a media that will only push one line. That's what we get in this country. You don't get the actual story of what's happening in Syria, because it's all filtered, it's all controlled, it's all propaganda. And the fact, 2 weeks ago I heard that 600 Mujahideen were dropped into Syria. Well, this is what we're talking about. This is the Iraqi-based Al-Qaeda that were dropped in there. 600 Mujahideen are highly trained, insurgents.
And the day after this atrocity that this McClatchy report talks about, Obama blamed Assad for it, which is instead of what his enemies did.
And everyone's getting this idea that somehow Assad, who is actually trying to defend the sovereignty of his country, is some great bogeyman. All he is doing, as did Saddam Hussein, as did Muammar Gaddafi. Now, these guys were tyrants, but they did have some degree of concern for the development or the sovereignty of their country. They were still heads of state. There was still a structure there. But again, the intention of the British Empire is to destroy the sovereignty of the country first and foremost. And they used their former assets, like Osama bin Laden, who was a good friend of the Bushes, or Gaddafi, or even Saddam Hussein, former very useful tools, very useful assets, and then they'll turn on them because they have a higher goal in place.
All right, so we'll be putting out a release on this tomorrow. People will check out the details on our website, but this is the scandal of the year so far. All right, when we return, we're going to talk about how flying Qantas is going to be like Russian roulette. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now, after ditching 500 maintenance jobs, is flying Qantas Russian roulette? So last week we talked about the true state of the Australian economy, and we listed the job losses that have been piling up this year alone. Since last week, we can add 1,000 job losses from the ANZ Bank after a record profit, and at least 500, Craig, possibly 1,000 up to 1,500 jobs will be lost, and that was in Qantas, and that was announced today by the nasty little leprechaun who runs Qantas, who knows who I'm talking about. It turns out that Qantas is the largest employer of skilled engineers in Australia, and it is these jobs that they're targeting. Any jobs that are lost are obviously bad for the people who've lost them, but you have to acknowledge that there's a big difference between the 1,000 jobs lost in the ANZ Bank and 500 to 1,000 jobs lost at Qantas, these kind of jobs.
Well, that's the whole point of this, Robbie, is that people think about just in terms of, another 500 jobs have just been lost. Now, if you go back 50 years ago, right, have a look at how cars ran 50 years ago. They were much simpler. Yep. So the jobs that you required in order to keep them on the road was, in a sense, much simpler. But they still required skilled labour. Just the average Joe couldn't go out and fix a car unless he actually had some sort of training. Today, you look at the engines that come out of these and the makeup of these new cars with all the necessary gear for pollution control and increased mileage and so forth. These are highly skilled jobs that are required in the automotive industry. It's the same thing with aeroplanes. Here you have an industry that requires more highly skilled labour than most other industries. But the more important thing is it's a very short-sighted idea that somehow a government can just let these jobs disappear.
Well, I'm glad you made that comparison to the cars, because quite bizarrely, I think, today, Qantas management, Alan Joyce and Bill Shorten, representing the federal government, they both offered exactly the same excuse for these losses, which is that modern aircraft, like modern cars, don't need maintenance. So what do you think about that as a mindset?
Well, that's absurd. I mean, of course they need maintenance, but they're saying, we're going to get the maintenance done somewhere else cheaper. We don't want to employ more highly paid, not necessarily more qualified people, but more highly paid people in Australia because we can't compete. So everything comes down to the bottom dollar, the bottom line dollar, right? This is a private company now. We're talking about Qantas. It's governed by Australian law that it can't be sold off, but it's doing everything it possibly can to survive in a climate of global free trade. So in global free trade is what's killing many of our industries at this particular time. Go back another 50 years. Did we have a problem with an Australian interest rate Australian dollar, I should say, at 106? We didn't have these problems with the Australian dollar because we didn't have a floating exchange rate system. So what we're experiencing, is in this last period right now, is a fag end of about 40 years of planned destruction of a functional economy. So the idea is, we've just got to sweep these jobs aside. We've just got to accept the fact that our car industry is in trouble. If we lose this, Robbie, we lose the ability to develop any sophisticated industries in this country. And we need high-speed train networks to cover the tyranny of distance. We need a space industry. We're perfectly located with Cape York being so close to the equator. We need to participate in developing space in order to make the discoveries that we still don't understand about, on how the actual Earth or the universe works. We need the opportunity to have more skilled labour, not less.
And special mention here has to be made of the city of Geelong, because at the rate it's going with the car industry, Ford, Alcoa, and now these jobs which are concentrated in Geelong, then these are all skilled workers, every single one of them in these different big enterprises. There's going to be a closing down sign on that city very soon.
Well, this is the policy, the British Empire, of population control by removing the necessary fundamental basic economic infrastructure to support and to develop economies. We're going backwards at a rapid rate when you see the shutdown of the auto industry, the removal of Qantas and many other industries, even down to the point of making tomato sauce, our own tomato sauce. It might seem like a bit of an absurd idea, but it's the same problem. When you have a commitment to free trade, globalisation, privatisation and the destruction of basic economic infrastructure for the benefit of private shareholder profits, which is what's going on with our banking system, right? The Commonwealth Bank came out with, $3.6 billion profit, up 19%.
Half-year profit, yep.
Half-year profit, up 19% last year. Westpac's just come out with a $1.8 billion profit, and they're now telling us that they're broke or they've got to increase interest rates. Again, it's another lie. The reason they have to increase interest rates is because the Australian banking system is part of the global carry trade. Well, I mentioned before in the last segment the fact that the entire British monetary system is in a process of disintegration. The Australian banking system, even with these monumental profits that are gouging the hell out of our populations, isn't going to survive when a majority of their actual debt is having to be rolled over. I'm talking large amounts of money here, what, $800 billion or something, has to be rolled over in the very short term. So even those profits, even though they're huge, shows you how actually vulnerable they are.
So everywhere we look, every sector we're looking at, the Australian economy is pretty much shot.
That's the problem. And you've got about 150, maybe a couple of exceptions, about 148 maybe, idiots in that parliament of ours that are more concerned about whether Kevin Rudd is the Prime Minister or Julia Gillard, and they're talking about a guy like Kevin Rudd who's running around, basically promoting Al-Qaeda, like you see with President Obama. I mean, this stuff is nuts, and this is why, again, if people can't believe, going back to our previous section, if people can't believe that Al-Qaeda can get in bed with the President of the United States, and they still want to hang on to their axioms of global free trade, privatisation, and the British system, well, Robbie, look, there's no future for the rest of mankind, because it's this sort of thinking, these sorts of axioms, that are driving the world into the despair that it's in right now.
All right, well, we could talk about that more, but we better leave it there for now, Craig. So when we return, finally we'll talk about how the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's own expert has ripped the Water Act to shreds. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So finally, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's own expert rips the Water Act to shreds. Last week on this program we covered the Mildura Murray-Darling Basin Authority meeting where Glenn Isherwood drew Tony Burke out on his actual intention to shut down food production in Australia. Also at that meeting, Tony Burke was challenged by a local grower on the view of Harvard University professor John Briscoe. Now, John Briscoe is one of the world's leading water experts. He's the former advisor on water to the World Bank, and he was the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's own choice to head the international peer review panel for the original MDBA Guide to the Basin Plan. Now, as a peer reviewer, Briscoe's job was essentially to proofread the guide. It was his job to make sure that the sums added up right. When that guide was released in late 2010, which is when we started covering it on this program, and all hell broke loose, there was a parliamentary inquiry called into the nature of the Water Act itself. Briscoe wrote a submission to that inquiry where he told them what he really thought. In that submission, Briscoe denounced the Water Act 2007 and the political process surrounding it as, quote, a political deception driven by what we know as the orchestrated rise of the city-based environmental vote.
So you mean the peer review process actually worked?
For once.
I was going to say, Robbie, because we put a cartoon out during the election campaign last time. It might have been a bit later, but I mean, the point is that usually the peer review process is used for completely the opposite purpose. Like you see with the global warming, the IPCC report, where they've said, this is a fully peer-reviewed document, this report, and you turn out it's only been 10% of it or something.
Well, when we say the peer review process worked, it's half worked. In this case, the peer reviewer did his job.
Yes.
But his actual views, the government has decided not to listen to, and you'll see why. Because the guy was very direct. He characterised. This is the way he characterised the MDB Basin Plan process, Craig. He said it is, quote, we will run the numbers and science behind closed doors and then tell you the result. That's, as an outsider, that's what he saw going on.
Well, that's exactly how they do it.
Exactly.
That's right.
He then reported very interestingly, he said, quote, in all my years of public service, often in very sensitive environments, I have never been subjected to such an elaborate confidentiality process as that embodied in the preparation of the Guide to the Basin Plan. That's a very telling statement because, of course, this is what we've been running into ourselves. the secrecy and lies of the whole
the
process.
cover-ups and the inability to really want to have a public consultation process.
So finally, Briscoe urged the government in this submission to scrap Malcolm Turnbull's Water Act, start again, this time sincerely include the views, the input from the people who he said have made the Murray-Darling Basin a world model of efficient water management. And by that he means the farmers and the actual experts who run the thing on a daily basis. So when Tony Burke was challenged about this very strongly worded submission at this Mildura meeting last week, Burke sneered.
I will admit on the John Briscoe stuff, I am more interested in the views that I get directly from communities than an American university academic telling me what Australian law should say.
And to which an interjector in the meeting correctly pointed out, that's because you choose the science to back you up. You just choose the models to support your argument. Anyway, Craig,
put that guy on a peer review committee.
We should. These consultations are the real peer review, and they don't want to listen to it. My question to you though, isn't Burke's reaction to Briscoe just the latest predicate that shows, because it's so transparent, it shows their reaction, all they are is determined to smash this food bowl at all costs.
As we've said many times, Robin, we put the DVD out now, which is Ecosystems of Genocide or Fraud. This is a top-down political agenda to shut down our food bowl, specifically directed top-down by the British Crown through the personages of Prince Philip. This is about population reduction, and it's not a very nice subject. When you're confronting farmers in this area that are having their entire livelihood shut down, we are seeing increases of depression rates as reported to us, anecdotally through our meetings and so forth with farmers.
Suicides.
And consequent suicides, that's right. I mean, you see this is a lawful progression. Take the Griffith area, for example. Here you have an area that was carved out of the desert, produces enormous volumes of produce, particularly watermelons lately and rock melons for the southern markets. It produces an abundance of food, and they intend to take the very essence of the water away from that production. That's genocide. That's planned and willful. And Tony Burke is nothing much more than a hatchet man for the British Empire. He was put in there specifically because, as part of his depopulation ministry, he agrees that Australia is overpopulated.
Yeah, they've had an agenda, which we've nailed them on, and you just repeated it. But to cloak that agenda, they've come up with a formal process of inquiry, etc. And we've said all along this is rubbish, right? Because we've stripped it all back and said just forget all the decoration here. Look at the intention, right? But here's their own guy coming out and saying the same thing.
That's the point. If you want to find the truth about anything, you have to look at the intention about what is actually going on here. Now, we knew this. We got the smell of this from day one. You start to see the destruction. You start to see who's at the top of this, Prince Philip and so forth. You know this is genocide. So we smelt it. We also dug up things like the CEC Report and so forth to show the banks were behind this. And then you get these present surprises where this guy like Briscoe comes up and says, look, I found the same thing. It's the same thing with the BBC report that we actually dug up on just recently on the Ecosystems DVD. So, I mean, I think people should watch that DVD, get a copy of it, and really bring themselves up to speed in what we're actually saying.
All right, we've caught them red-handed, but we have to leave it there because we've run out of time. So thanks for tuning in again. Watch the DVD, as Craig said. Look on our website for updates and tune in next week for more.